The big reveal: global trade isn't free. It's a rigged system where a handful of corporations and financiers secretly coordinate supply, prices, and access, meaning 80% of everything you eat, wear, or buy flows through a network built for profit, not people. The hidden empire of trade. What if every product in your house, your phone, your coffee, your car, was moved, priced, and insured by the same invisible group of billionaires? What if free trade was never free at all? Because behind every shiny container ship, there's a shadow empire. Not governments, not voters, but private networks, financial cartels controlling the literal bloodstream of civilization, global trade. This is not your Econ 101 story about supply and demand. It's about who owns the supply chain and how they turned the world's trade routes into pipelines of power. Hey, before we dive into this rabbit hole, drop a quick comment. Where are you watching from? Because whether it's California or Cairo, what we're about to unpack affects every dollar you spend. If you into real financial history, the kind they don't teach at Harvard, hit that subscribe button for more unfiltered truth. All right. Let's talk about the network that runs the world. It starts not in Silicon Valley, but on the open seas, 5 centuries ago. When European empires began chasing spices and gold, they didn't just explore, they privatized trade itself. The Dutch East India Company in 1602, the British East India Company in 1608. These weren't governments. They were corporate states with their own armies, ships, and currencies. They didn't just move goods. They owned the rules. And guess what? They had shareholders, investors, dividends. Sound familiar? Today we call it globalization. Back then it was colonial monopoly. The Dutch East India Company once controlled over 50% of the world's trade routes. It was worth more than Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft combined, adjusted for inflation. One company, one global network, and the world obeyed its price tags. Fast forward to 2024. The names have changed: Maersk, MSC, Glencore, Trafigura, but the structure? Almost identical. 3 shipping giants now control over 80% of global container capacity. Yeah, you heard that right. And those containers, the 20-foot metal boxes, move 90% of all traded goods on Earth. From sneakers to semiconductors, if you can touch it, they've moved it. And each time they move it, they collect not just money, but data. Who buys, who ships, who pays. Sound familiar? Like the digital monopolies of big tech? Exactly. Except this monopoly is physical and far harder to regulate. Now here's where it gets wild. In 1971, when Nixon ended the gold standard, the world moved to a paper trade system, dollar-based contracts and commodity derivatives. That's when financiers realized something huge. They didn't need to own the oil or the ship if they owned the contract. Thus was born the financialization of trade, the point where moving goods became less profitable than betting on their prices. By the 1980s, trading houses like Glencore and Vitol weren't just shipping oil, they were manipulating futures. By 2000, Goldman Sachs created index funds that let pensions bet on wheat, copper, or gas. And when everyone bets, who's left setting the odds? Sound familiar? Welcome to the 21st Century East India Company, the invisible handshakes. In 2010, a leaked report from the World Trade Organization mentioned something strange. 80% of global trade flows through less than a dozen intermediary firms. 12 firms, moving trillions, no public oversight. And who connects them? Not politicians, but banks. Credit Suisse, JP Morgan, BNP Paribas. They don't just lend to these trading giants, they own stakes, seats, and silence. When oil prices crashed in 2014, one trader didn't lose money. He made billions. His name? You won't believe the name. But let's get there first, because the receipt is wilder than you think. Financial Mechanics Deep Dive. All right, let's lift the curtain. Meet Ivan Glasenberg, the South African billionaire who turned Glencore, a small trading desk, into the most powerful commodity empire on Earth. By 2020, Glencore controlled over 60% of global copper trade, half of zinc, and a third of the world's oil swaps. That's not logistics, that's leverage. Here's how it works. When a developing country digs up copper, it usually can't afford the infrastructure to sell it. So Glencore steps in. We'll finance your mine, build your port, insure your cargo, and we'll handle the sale. Sounds generous, right? Except the contract locks that nation into decades of dependency. Selling raw resources cheap, buying refined goods back expensive. That's not partnership. That's a credit-based colonization system. And behind Glencore's deals, banks like Barclays and BNP Paribas provide trade finance, loans tied to commodities as collateral. So if copper prices crash, guess who owns the mine? Not the nation, the network. Now multiply that system by every resource on Earth: oil, wheat, lithium, rare earths. That's trillions of dollars, controlled by a handful of traders in Geneva, London, and Singapore. Let's talk numbers. In 2021, the top 10 trading firms handled 16 trillion in transactions. That's larger than the entire GDP of China. The top 5 banks backing them issued $3.4 trillion in trade finance loans. 90% of marine insurance policies are written by just 3 syndicates in London, and 6 corporations control nearly all global freight data systems. That's not competition, that's coordination, and it's all legal, because global trade operates in what S called jurisdictional limbo. A ship registered in Panama, owned by a company in Cyprus, financed by a bank in Switzerland, carrying goods sold in dollars through a contract in Singapore. Try regulating that. It's like trying to arrest a ghost that lives in the cloud. But remember, the network isn't just financial, it's political. In 2014, during the Crimean crisis, Western sanctions were supposed to choke Russian oil, but trading houses like Trafigura and Vitol quietly rerouted it through intermediaries, blending it, renaming it, and selling it anyway. And guess who financed those shipments? Western banks. Why? Because the margins were too juicy to resist. That's moral hazard on a global scale. They don't just move oil, they move wars. When one network can redirect food, fuel, or fertilizer, they don't just profit. They hold nations hostage. In 2022, a fertilizer shortage hit Africa. Prices tripled. Crops failed. Meanwhile, Glencore posted record profits, over $34 billion. That's not coincidence. That's extraction. Now, remember that leak? 12 intermediary firms. Guess whose name was on it? Glencore, Trafigura, Vitol, Cargill, Mercuria, Gunvor, Louis Dreyfus. Add a few banks, add a few insurers. Congratulations, you've just mapped the billionaire network. But here's the twist. This system didn't just appear. It was built by the same Wall Street brains who engineered the mortgage crisis. They took derivatives, offshore financing, and shadow banking and fused them with trade. Now every shipment, every crop, every barrel of oil is just another financial instrument. If it sounds like the 2008 crash waiting to happen again, you're not wrong. In fact, the Bank for International Settlements warned in 2023 that trade-linked derivatives had quietly ballooned to 1.2 quadrillion in notional value. Quadrillion. With a Q, that's more than 10 times global GDP. And it's all invisible. When these bets go wrong, governments rush in to stabilize markets. Translation: bail out the same network again. So the cycle continues. Collapse, rescue, profit, repeat. Yeah, that's not suspicious at all. The end game. Here's the truth nobody wants to admit. Globalization wasn't an accident. It was an architecture of control. By outsourcing production and privatizing trade, the elites didn't just make money. They made the rules. Today, 80% of global trade moves through private hands. The free market is owned by less than 100 billionaires, protected by treaties, lubricated by debt, and sanitized by PR. Governments? They're just the insurance policy. When the system cracks, taxpayers foot the bill. When it thrives, profits go offshore. And with automation, AI logistics, and digital shipping ledgers, control is tightening, not loosening. The same algorithms that route your Amazon package are now optimizing the world's commodity flows. So, what's the real risk? The next crisis won't come from Wall Street. It'll come from supply chains, a data glitch, a sanctions war, a port shutdown. And when it happens, these billionaires will already be hedged because they built the system to fail safely. The rest of us? We'll just pay more and wonder why. So the question isn't if the network controls trade. It's whether we'll ever reclaim it. Because every empire falls. But this one doesn't need cannons or colonies. It runs on credit and denial. So next time you see a cargo ship drifting across the ocean, remember, it's not just carrying goods, it's carrying the illusion of freedom. Are we wiser now? Or just walking the same path? In better suits? If you made it this far, you're part of the rare few who actually care to understand what's really happening. Drop a comment, share this with someone who still thinks the market is free, and subscribe. Because next time, we're decoding the secret bank that funds this entire empire. Until then, stay curious and stay skeptical.